presenting the storyboard that I made about the short story of the boarded window. I decided to sketch the scene of the main event in the story, which caused Mr. Murlock to change and become lonely forever. I chose the scene which essentially illustrated why Mr. Murlock's window became boarded, and the point of view is told from a young lad who found out about the story from his grandfather as he was young, not when he grew up. And so it's the sketch is his imagination. The setting of the entire scene takes place in the dining room. This is because he had his wife on the table, which means the table is big enough to fit his wife, and so the big table is usually located in the dining room where a family eats dinner, lunch, and breakfast. The window in the back shows trees because the setting of the story takes place in a forest. The moon and the stars represent darkness. This is because the story kept mentioning how everything occurred in the darkness, and if it's darkness, it's usually nighttime. And there are not as much furniture included. There's many reasons for this. The first is because they lived in the forest. Mr. Murlock and his wife, they lived in a forest far away from the city, which means it's hard to get furniture and purchase furniture. And the setting also took place in 1830, which meant everything was black and white, along with a small, tight house. This is a sketch that I drew the total sketches together. This is sketch number 1. It opens up the scene. Mr. Murlock's wife is dressed in a skirt because it is a tradition to be dressed in nice and beautiful clothes when you die. Her hands are crossed because that is how the narrator described her position. Mr. Murlock and his wife are both illustrated because it is not taken from any of their point of view, which means the narrator knew what happened, could see every little detail from it as it was explained to him from his grandfather for the little boy. And the lad narrates the story for this picture in an angle where he sees everything that is going on, including the setting on the inside and on the outside of the house. The coffin that Mr. Murlock's wife was open because Mr. Murlock was still preparing her. And I sketched this scene so that the audience can see every little bit of information of the scene without any confusion. Mr. Murlock is shown on a chair leaning on the table from the fact that he was asleep while preparing to bury his wife in sketch number 2. His hands are illustrated as crossed due to the fact that he put his hands on the table and fell asleep. Is the most common way for any human being to fall asleep on the table, and especially if you are sad and depressed, which is exactly what Mr. Murlock was going through. The window was definitely demonstrated as half open because how else would have this whole horror story occurred and caused Mr. Murlock to change forever. And Mr. Murlock's wife was also positioned in the same way, well, because the dead don't move, and Mr. Murlock's face doesn't show in the scene because it is supposed to illustrate that his head was down, and from the narrator's point of view, the angle doesn't show his face unless it was shown from the table's point of view, which it's not because it's from the lad's point of view. Now, sketch number 3 is different than the other two. This is when the lad imagines how the panther realizes that there's an open window, and the panther, in my opinion, must have smelled the dead body due to the strong sense of smell. But this is because back in the 1830s, there was no refrigerator to keep the dead body from giving a bad smell, and so the panther smelt it and started coming towards the window. And the panther is shaded with black in my sketch because the narrator described him as a black panther, and he also represents evil. The panther's teeth are shown to further demonstrate the evil intention of his smile and to foreshadow the horror that is going to occur. The teeth also demonstrate evil because when a young lad imagines things, he sees the worst of it and imagines how panther's teeth come out when he is hungry. Now, picture number 4 is this is where the panther was trying to come in. I illustrated as him trying to climb up from the window, and the setting is still dark. And as the panther was trying to climb in, Mr. Murloc heard horror noises in the picture, and it showed how Mr. Murloc is frightened in the dark, sweating and horrified to hear the scary sounds in the dark. I sketched Mr. Murloc's face towards the audience because I was trying to show his face expression along with the irony that the audience know there's a panther, but Mr. Murloc doesn't know and can't see it. And Mr. Murloc is still sitting on the chair. In sketch number 5, in this picture, the lad still imagines all the details of that scene. From his point of view, you could still see every detail required to understand the story. The Black Panther has already invaded the house. Mr. Murloc was very shocked at this point, and the standing pieces of hair represent how he was going crazy with hearing all the noises and considering that there's a creature in the house. Now, I didn't put any words to show how in the sketch to show how Mr. Murloc is horrified. So these small pieces of hair are show how he's really nervous and scared and how he's really going crazy. The Black Panther is set up so that he's facing Mr. Murloc's wave. This somewhat foreshadows what's about to occur in the next picture, and the setup is still in the same place. For sketch number 6, the picture includes many events occurring at the same time. So now the audience could get an understanding of what is going to happen, because since the lad knows exactly what happened and the angle is illustrated in his point of view, the audience will understand what's going on too. And I sketched Mr. Murloc running towards us to grab the gun, so it allows us to view his face expression clearly. And so from the lad's point of view, you can see how the Black Panther is grabbing Mr. Murloc's wife from her throat and how he's stealing her away from her coffin. In sketch number 7, you start to realize how blood is coming out. It does not mention in the story, but I did it because it is more likely for some blood to still appear, because back in the 1830s, they still did not take all the blood out of the human body when they died or passed away. I also sketched Mr. Murloc running this way because he does not see or understand what happens, and how in the upcoming picture the Black Panther's ear ends up in his wife's mouth. From the lad's point of view, Mr. Murloc was on his way to grab the gun, so from the angle I chose for the picture, it causes the audience to want to continue to the end. Now, we're almost done. For sketch number 8, this picture shows Mr. Murloc running towards his wife to try and save her from that evil creature. The angle shows the back of Mr. Murloc to demonstrate that he's going to capture the Black Panther, and at the same time recognizing how the Black Panther is running away to the forest and away from the house. The setting is also still dark, and the chair is not shown due to the lack of its importance, and the image is getting more zoomed into the window than the past pictures to show how Mr. Murloc is running towards the window and what's about to happen there. Now, picture number 9, this is a sketch shown from a close-up of what Mr. Murloc views as he sees what happened to his wife, and the shock when he sees the Black Panther running away. Now, Mr. Murloc does not notice the panther's ear until he looks at his wife's mouth, but as he looks at his wife's mouth, but as for the audience, I sketched the panther with one ear to show that the piece in Mr. Murloc's wife in his mouth is the panther's ear. At this point, the angle of the illustration shows the window but does not show the rest of the setting of the dining room, because I want the audience to concentrate at the window and what is going on there. The event is still happening at the same setting but from a close-up view. Now, the last sketch, this is the ending of the scene. This picture illustrates Mr. Murloc's expression about the mystery he'd just seen. He's seen something supernatural, and so he is shocked. This angle demonstrates how Mr. Murloc is having conflict between man versus supernatural. My sketch is purposely shown from this angle to allow us to see see the visualization that the author Ambrose Bierce wants us to see, and the final position of the characters he wants us to end with. Mr. Murlock's wife is still shown with no motion because, well, this is the mystery that the author wants us to think about. This is the end. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.